Tossing Grenades at Windmills podcast.
Welcome to the Tossing Grenades at Windmills podcast. I'm TC Ricks, and this episode is about my writing for Jay Weilin and his projects on the Sentinel Chronicles and on a new project he calls Green Winter, which is actually named The House of the Blue Sun. So, a little bit of background here. For those of you who are not familiar, I wear a lot of nom de plumes like I wear hats. Looking around my office, for example, I see a top hat. I see my wicker fedora, since I'm in Florida. I see my Hamburgian, which was given to me as a gift, and I intend to wear it in Switzerland when we visit with my wife. I see a bowler. I see a white fedora-ish thing. I see the, I forget the name of the hat that, I think it's a pork pie, but it's not. It's a very nice one that we got in New Orleans. I see the Ministry of Silly Walks hat that was given to me. I see the Parisian chapeau that I was given, that I bought when we were in Paris. I see my wife's tea hat, which I could probably wear under the right circumstances, but probably would not be my first choice. And those are the ones I see off the top of my head. I think there might be a couple of others. Anyway, and of course there's my favorite hat, which is the leather, almost cowboyish hat that I picked up as the very first hat I bought. It's made of the same kind of leather you might expect the sorting hat at Hogwarts to be made out of. I picked it up because it looks a lot like the hat Harry Dresden wears on the covers of the Jim Butcher novels, which also happens to go with the leather duster I tend to wear. Even though, if you know Jim Butcher well and are a fan of Jim Butcher, he does not actually wear a hat in the books. Conversely, as an artist, I wear a number of different hats. I am, of course, Thomas Ricks in reality, or TC Ricks, as I refer to myself typically on the podcast, to distinguish from the real me, but the fictional me that is often brought up by my other fictional characters, including, hi, I'm Rhombus Tix, who is a wonderful individual from Louisiana and a fictional universe called Terra, which is part of the Four Worlds podcast, or the four worlds that I typically include on the podcast, including Terra, Mana, Gaia, and, of course, Earth. I have also used the nom de guerre. Hi, I'm A.P. Blingamaya, and I'm the humblest man I know, who technically owns this podcast, although given that the ownership is logged and registered in Terra, I think as far as the Earth legal system is concerned, I hold the copyright. I also use the nom de guerre E. Emmett Other, which I have a book of poetry out called Spiders in the Sugar Factory, in which I did with the collaboration of a fantastic artist called Lenny Morris, who is a much more prominent and talented artist now than when I originally hired her to do the work. She's becoming nationally famous, and long after I am dust, I think her work will probably be prominently displayed in a lot of places. I also use the poet name Redwin Tercer, for those of you who are diehard fans of the podcast. You would have heard me use the term cyborg Redwin Tercer, because at one point I wrote a poem called Redwin Tercer Gets Hit by a Bus. Complicated story. Needless to say, Emmett and Redwin are twins. It's a complicated backstory, but occasionally I write poetry under Redwin Tercer, mainly for my more serious and/or political poems, which is why at one point I killed him off. But of course I brought him back because, what's the point of having your own podcast if you can't bring your fictional self back? I've also been known as Big T, which was I did on one podcast as a character who was the bad guy in a joke reel that we did for a family reunion called the Rixlars, He was a character whose sole motivation was stealing the powers of the other Rixlars, because why not have alien powers? Those are the only ones that come off that I can think of. Of course, I've used tons, but there is one other that I have not gone into great deal on the podcast, and that is Tom Drake. Now, there are a number of real-world Tom Drakes, which is one of the reasons why I've been hesitant to use it, but the other reason is I primarily use that alias as a producer and screenwriter. I have done 4 short films. It's been a while, although I'm going to be picking that up probably next year. I did 4 short films, one of which was the Forgotten. The other one was Other People's Musicals, and I've done a couple of other ones, including Dueling Morons. It was a learning process. I learned a lot about it, but one of the other things on that IMDb note that you will see is that I have worked as either the lead writer or the lead script writer or a contributing writer for a web series called The Sentinel Chronicles, which is a web series that Jay has had as his singular passion project. Jay and I have been friends for a number of years, and he has created an entire universe with multiple factions. I've been working with Jay on this almost since the beginning. Quite some time. It's enjoyed a couple of different iterations. It was fairly successful and widely participated in Atlanta until Jay moved up to Kentucky and met his current wife and has built a whole new family over there. And he reached out to me to help him work on that. And it's turned out great. Jay, I've got, as you can hear from just the last several minutes, I've had a lot of different esoteric projects, novels, podcasts. Jay does work on a lot of commercial stuff, but his singular focus has been the Sentinel Chronicles for a number of years, and it shows, because what started out as a very rough, stylistic, almost 8-bit style of graphic, he has actually embraced and owned and made his own personal art form until he's using very advanced technologies to make 8-bit style graphics in a way that just really comes off sharp. You have to see it. I'll see if I can include a link on the podcast. But his newest project, Green Winter, is what he likes to sell as Firefly meets Game of Thrones. And I did a kind of a genre analysis of what that might actually mean to him. But essentially, it is a futuristic projection of the Sentinel Chronicles universe. The Sentinel Chronicles universe is basically, the elevator pitch for that is, in a world depopulated by a bioweapon gone wrong, humanity fights its wars with these biodroids, which are essentially part clone and part DNA from other species, that, of course, get out of control and start to basically kill off humanity. And it gets worse and worse and worse until eventually, by the end of the Chronicle, humanity has to flee to the stars on FTL drives developed by the biodroids, who humanity, being typical morons and ignoring all science fiction that's ever been produced, make these FTL ships. So Green Winter, or the House of the Blue Sun, takes a lot of these original factions and creates other factions that are descended from those. And each of the contributing writers is doing one of those factions. The one that I was given was the House of the Blood Moon. Jay has a talent for coming up with very interesting names. And they are descended from the Northern Alliance, which is a politically progressive faction at one point entirely dominated by women. And he wanted me to take that and run with it. So I did. I have a passion for government. I have a passion for a utopia in it, which is interesting because The Sentinel Chronicles, and I would argue to another extent, based on everything I've seen of the screen Bibles so far that we've produced for Green Winter, is very dystopian. Constant war, constant fighting, constant betrayal, the supremacy of sides, one over another, constantly happens. So I decided I would start with almost an Arthurian mythos, with a queen and a Merlin instead of King Arthur, and what would happen if Camelot did not fall. So the House of the Blue Sun is largely divided into three great houses. There's the Victoria, who is similar to a monarch who serves for life, but is chosen through a series of candidates by a committee, including the previous Victoria, or the current Victoria, and the nobles, as well as the elected government, to basically act as a ceremonial head of state with a few more powers. But the thing is that the House of the Blue Sun takes a concept that I'm basically already discussing on the political side of things, in which I believe that the culture wars are the only war that matters. So in the House of the in the House of the Blood Moon, culture is everything. Like, they define their culture by culture and the means to achieve it, which brings me to the second house, which I created almost out of whole cloth, based on the slogan that Jay created for each house. The one he created for the House of the Blood Moon was Victoria in Virtue, Virtue and Victoria, depending on which way it ends up going. But the point is that I took that concept of virtue and extended it to the British concept of a House of Lords, essentially making these virtues the Supreme Court, and also a little bit like the political officers in the USSR, which basically a de facto no. With the idea being that, especially towards the end of the Sentinel Chronicles, there's so many conspiracies and so much betrayal, and the military just gets out of hand so many times that the Merlin type I'm creating, who I'm still working on the name for, basically realizes that there needs to be a check on the military at all times to keep them from getting out of hand. Like, this concept of the military obeying an unlawful or unconstitutional order is simply unacceptable. There's societal ramifications for that, and of course the third house is frankly just a parliament. There's nothing that exciting about a parliament. There is some other things that I'm still working on, specifically, for example, a fourth unelected branch, which is conspiracies, but we're still hammering that out. I think that the idea is novel and it creates a lot of interesting story potential, but it's very much in flux, and I want to hash it out with the main writers. I just wanted to give you a small taste of what I'm working on and some of the thoughts I'm bouncing around back and forth on it. And right now, it's going to be a web series, which so far Jay has made some very interesting media contacts on this, and it looks very promising. It's going to be at Gen Con and several other conventions. I'll probably do at least a couple of other podcasts about this as I have more details to share. But I wanted to talk just a little bit more about my background writing with Jay, because Jay is basically the person who taught me how to make movies. I mean, I kind of did a little exploring on my own. The Forgotten are basically ghouls who we went out to the cemetery near where my parents used to live in Atlanta and got a bunch of people in makeup. And my mom is there with a sword, and her friend, who's now passed, Daniel Burnley, did a fantastic voiceover. And all of these are, by the way, on my YouTube channel if you want to find it. I still haven't taken my brother's rather good suggestion to the point where I'm going to start doing YouTube broadcasts of this podcast. Still trying to figure out exactly how that's going to work. Might also wait until we just have a new place. Either way, I'm still working on that. But the point is that that movie was okay, and it was edited in large part by my sister Julie, who is a fantastic natural editor. She was not able to continue on with that, but then again, I haven't been doing my own short films either. I eventually had to learn how to edit on my own with Jay's input on other people's musicals, which later I had some problems with the way I put that together, and with Jay's input, the last film I did, which was a reshoot of Dueling Morons, turned out pretty good. There's a few technical glitches that I had, which I never quite got out, which is why I never submitted it really strongly to other film festivals. But the lessons learned from that are really neat for a lot of reasons, not just because now I kind of know how to make movies, even if I have to take the time and budget to do that, and that's an undertaking for anybody who's ever been involved with independent film. You know how challenging but fun that can be. But the neat thing about learning how to do that, even though I haven't done a short film in probably 7 years, is that it really affects the way you see movies, too. You see things in movies like, how they're edited, how they're put together, how the sound goes. And some people think it spoils movies for them. It doesn't for me. It actually makes me realize how much skill goes into movies. And, sometimes if a movie doesn't work, it becomes a lot easier to see what does or doesn't work. Oh, well, that movie had a great director but a terrible editor, or the cinematography was awesome but the script was just weak. The thing about film that I really like versus a novel is a novel I can pretty much do entirely on my own, and while, especially as an independent novelist or author, it's pretty much my own show when I have the funds to do it. So I can choose the cover artist, I can choose the performer who does the audiobook, and I have several projects in the work that are very, very slow in going, but, they're mine, and I can do them at my own will. The Green Winter project, on the other hand, is going full steam ahead. Jay is essentially a human dynamo. I have never known anyone who is so passionate about one project, much less the same project over literally decades, and it shows in his work. And it's starting to see some real success, and I'm glad to be aboard with him on it. I'll keep you guys posted, and we'll go from there.
This has been the Tossing Grenades at Windmills podcast. Buy my book, Have Name Will Travel, available in many markets, including at Amazon.com. Copyright
2019.
Red Anvil Amalgamated, LLC.
To fight the forces of evil!